learning, that you're studying, because for every person, there's always a reason that for not, even if you got nothing to do, there's still a reason to not, study. You can always just space out and see something on your phone or on your screen, wash your dishes, make your Rosh Hashanah shopping list. Fear not, I haven't done that at all. And no, you're saying, no, this is the priority, and it is, and this brings down the blessings. And when the blessings are there, everything goes. And when the blessings aren't there, nothing goes. Like we don't even understand sometimes, like sometimes someone make this little mistake, which opens up like 5,000 hours of work and money, and, or you would have almost made that little mistake, but God just, even if he made the mistake, God made it work out anyway. That's like the absolute blessings of his presence that just make the difficult easy, or conversely, the easy can become so difficult. So we should study, and we should rejoice that we have this ability to do this and connect him this way and feel him in our life. So we are in chapter 23. We are on page Chavtes 29, and we're about 8 lines from the top. So let me explain, remind us of where we're holding. So we said in this chapter, we are rejoicing and celebrating how close we are to God every time we serve him, every time we do a mitzvah, and in an even more intimate way, every time we learn his Torah, his will, his wisdom, and us become one. So first in the chapter, we discussed how enormously close we are every single time we do a mitzvah. And we discussed how close that mitzvah, that commandment, is to God, how it's nullified to the will of God and expressive of the will of God, like a body to a soul. How my spiritual parts, my godly soul, my spiritual garments, which means the way my soul expresses itself, that are engarbed in this commandment. Like if I'm giving charity, so it's my godly soul and her expression, her garment, her power of action. And if I'm praying, it will be my godly soul and the power of thought, because hopefully my mind is evolved, and her power of speech, because I better be talking, and perhaps the power of action, because I could be walking around, I could be moving my hands, I could be doing lots of actions that enhance my prayers. So all of that is as one with God's will, nullified to God's will, expressive of God's will, as the body to a soul. And even the part of the body itself that's doing the commandment, like the hand giving the charity and the elbow moving to move my hand to give the charity, or my brain cells and my tongue, lips, larynx, palate, and my fingers and my body movements as I'm praying, all of that are as one with God, not as much as body to soul, because it is a physical body part, but very, very one, and it's a physical body part, as chariot to rider. And then we said, but when you study Torah, when you study God's will and wisdom, you get a lot closer. You get so close, it's like you and God are one entity. Because Torah is him. It's him on the most inner level. It's his thoughts. It's his will. So when I am one with his thoughts, with his will, I become one with him. There's no separation. In other words, when my hands giving the charity are like the chariot to the rider. They're one with the will of God, but they each can, so to speak, exist separately. My soul, when I'm giving the charity, is as one with God as a body to a soul. So therefore, it's much more one because they can't exist separately, but it still is its own entity. I can see where one starts and the other stops. This is God's will. This is my soul. But when I'm talking about me studying God's Torah, at that point, my soul and her inner garments of thought and speech are so one with God's will, we can't separate. We can't say, well, this is with God's will, and this is your soul, and this is her garment of thought, and this is her garment of speech. It's just one. Because that's how close God is with his Torah. And therefore, that's how close I am with God when I study the Torah. And that's an amazing point. And as I posted on the group on the week, because Firma asked an excellent question last week, which I had answered. And then I happened to be studying something that extended my answer more, that expounded on it more. And I wanted to share that with everyone. But the normative road, the norm, again, we could be not normal, and we are sometimes, but the normal role is the Jew through the Torah becomes one with God. Like all my powers, which are in a sense more intense than Torah, closer to God than Torah, but they're ignited through Torah to become absolutely one with God. So continuing along this theme, so we are, as we said, on page Chavtes. It's 29. We're about 2, 4, 6, 8 lines from the top. So we're saying that within Torah, there's no concealment. Now, we don't sense that, which is good, because if we did, we would die and we would not be able to learn Torah. None of the higher spiritual worlds, none of the angels that populate the spiritual worlds, none of them can enjoy this unity with God that we're experiencing when we learn Torah, because they would experience it and therefore they would cease to exist. But we don't experience it, so we can exist. But at that moment, though I don't feel a thing, there's no barriers between my soul and God through this union achieved by studying Torah. Because there's no separation, there's just concealment, meaning the concealment of this physical world means I don't get what's going on, but there's no barriers. And actually, this union that I'm enjoying right now with God, my soul and God, that oneness is more intense than the oneness the highest spiritual reality experiences. Whatever you know. If you know Tanya, you'll call it Atzilus. If you know other stuff besides Tanya, you could go higher than Atzilus. Doesn't make a difference. The highest celestial creations, the highest spiritual entities are not experiencing what my soul experiences right now, because I'm learning Torah. And so are all of you, as long as you're paying attention and focused on understanding. What we're experiencing now, though we don't feel it, and we could even be hot or be itchy, or in one side of our brain be thinking about something else, but irrelevant. What my soul is experiencing, planet Atzilus has never experienced and will never experience. The highest angels, Gabriel, Michael, have never experienced and will never be able to experience what my soul is at this moment experiencing, because we're learning Torah. Because God's will is absolutely revealed right now in my soul and in all the garments of my soul. Right now, as we study Torah, there's no barriers. There's no concealments. Well, of course it's concealed. I don't feel a thing. To me, it's concealed. To my soul, there's no concealments. At this moment, my soul has no concealments with God's will, with means, with God. And the spiritual world couldn't handle that. So by them, there always have to be concealments. By them, there always has to be barriers. But my soul right now has no barriers. The Rebbe is saying, Torah is God's will. So if I'm studying Torah and Torah is being contained in my soul, God's will is contained in my soul. What about all the spiritual realities? They're all a product of Torah. They all get their vitality from Torah, but they're not one with Torah. They're not one with God's will. They're receiving life from God's will. So God's will, aka Torah, vivifies all the spiritual realities. But God's will, aka Torah, is one with me now, at this moment of time. Torah, God's will, and my soul are all absolutely one, to such a oneness that I can't see where one stops and the other starts. I can't discriminate between them, even in their embrace. They're that one. So all the celestial realities, all the spiritual worlds, they are vivified by Torah, by the will of God, by the level of God, as we discussed last week, that we call Sovev Kol Almin, that encompassing energy is so intense, it's encompassing. So Sovev, encompassing, God's will, Torah, and my soul are all one, giving life to all the realities, including the highest, most celestial. Because as we said, Torah is God's will and wisdom. It's one with him. Will, Torah, same thing. As is written, now bringing proof text for this. Kulam b'chachma asisa. All of them you have made with chachma. Chachma means wisdom, seminal wisdom. So again, now we're adding another thing here. We have God's will, God's wisdom, Torah, this level of encompassing energy, and my soul. God's will, God's wisdom, Torah, encompassing all the same thing. And now my soul's bound up with that as well, which gives life to all of creation. The imkain, and if so, Torah. So if we're saying God's wisdom, which is Torah, which is the will, which is this sovev encompassing energy, if it creates all, it's higher than all. Again, the verse said, all of them you make with your wisdom. So if you're making it with your wisdom's higher. So your wisdom, your will, Torah, your encompassing energies, that's all higher than everything it's giving life to. So therefore, my soul at this moment is also higher. At this moment, for all of those focused, understanding, if not understanding, ask questions. All of us right now, our souls are higher than the highest spiritual dimension. Right now, at this moment, my soul now, higher than planet Atzilus, higher than Atzilus, higher than the highest angels, higher than the primordial creations. My soul's higher than all that. Why? Because my soul is one with the source of all that. Because Torah, God's will, God's wisdom, God's encompassing energies, all of that is what gives life to all of creation. So if it's all higher than what it gives life to, and my soul is one with it, so my soul is also. That's what's happening to our soul right now. So when we said last week that when we learn, we are empowering our soul. So then it has the ability to go out and serve God and do lots of commandments. It's because of this gift of power it's receiving. Every second I'm learning Torah. Because look what's happening to my soul every second as I learn Torah. This is what's happening. That's why it's such an amazing experience that gives me such energy to go and serve God. So this is V'hi Ratzono Yisbarech. This is we're saying God's supernal will. Hanikra Sovev Kol Almin, which, as we said, is this level of God's encompassing energies. Now, why am I calling it God's encompassing energies? Because it's too intense to get into creation. It's encompassing creation, so to speak. It's around creation, so to speak. Why is it not within? Because it's too powerful to be within. That's what my soul is one with. So it's so powerful, it gives life, so to speak, from a distance, from above, from an encompassing level, because it can't get to it, because that would be overwhelming. That overwhelming for all the celestial energies is what my soul is one with right now. And that is completely revealed in my soul, not only in my soul, even in the garments of my soul, in the garment of thought and the garment of speech right now as we're learning. And I can say, wow, that's so cool, but I don't feel a thing. And the Rebbe says, that's okay. I mean, we'd say, be nice to feel something, but it's okay. Because even though you're not feeling it, it is impacting the same as if you were feeling it. Meaning, what's the point of all this? The point of all of this is the empowerment, is the way my soul is energized by this experience. So if I ever am not aware of the experience, my soul's still getting the same energy, which is soul that has the same power for me to be this powerhouse of serving God. That's why learning Torah, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe speaks, how learning Torah is the direct road to bringing Mashiach. So we can understand why learning Torah about Mashiach is a direct road to bringing Mashiach, because we understand how when we learn Torah, look what happens. Look at the power we're bringing into this world through my soul, through the garments of my soul, through Torah. And there are puts in parentheses, and there says, actually, as we speak of silver linings, the silver linings of COVID, the silver linings of lots of stuff in this world, the way it's supposed to look and find the silver lining. So the Rebbe says it's actually a big silver lining that you don't feel a thing. Because if you experience what your soul is going through, you wouldn't be able to take it. We would literally cease to exist. Like the first time we ever learned Torah, we would have ceased to exist. Because I can't handle that energy, but my soul can. The upper worlds can't handle it. That's why they don't get it. But they don't also get it for other reasons, but they can't handle it. So if they did get it, they wouldn't survive. I can't handle it. If I got it, I wouldn't survive either. But my soul can handle it because my soul is such an intimate piece of God to start with, so my soul can handle it. But if I was aware of what my soul was going through, I wouldn't be able to handle it. So therefore, it's good. I'm oblivious. I'm like, so to speak, fearless. I'm not overwhelmed with what's going on because I don't even know what's going on. But my soul knows what's going on. And my soul is experiencing it. And my soul is strengthened and charged by this experience. So if this is what's going on, we can understand why Torah is the most important thing we can do. Again, from the perspective of the intimacy, from the perspective of my relationship with God, there's nothing more important than learning Torah. Now, that doesn't mean you should sit and learn Torah all day and not serve Him with the commandments. But prioritizing, there's nothing more important. Not in the Chabad world, but in the regular, what we call the Litvish world, regular mainstream Orthodoxy, I guess you could say, there is a big virtue in after one is married to spend 6 months or a year or 25 years in what's called kollel, which means where they sit and they learn all day. Now, in the Chabad world, we don't really have that. We have it like just a year, 2 years. Wow, that was impressive. Because in the Chabad world, the aspiration, the virtue is to go out and change the world, what we call shlichus, to go out and help everyone else, Jews and non-Jews, come closer to God. So sometimes because of that, we lose the other side and we don't realize that we also believe it's amazing to sit and learn Torah day and night. It's just, we also understand there's a world burning up. There's a world in dire need. And that need of the world is more important than my own personal needs. And that's why we say the biggest, virtue, so to speak, the biggest aspiration is to go out and help other people and bring them God, bring God to the people, because there's some people that don't have a relationship with God at all. And because that's such a crisis, that's such a need, we put that in front of our own spiritual reality, so to speak, and go and do for others. But if there wasn't that need, if the world was the same place and everybody had a good relationship with God, of course, it's such an amazing thing to just sit and learn. Because look what happens when you sit and learn. And therefore, the Rebbe says, from that perspective, it's the most important way we have of serving God, even more than prayer. Now, I always think even more than prayer. Because I know prayer is such an amazing thing. It causes literally the upper worlds to fuse and new godliness to form. It's lots of very deep spiritual things happening when I'm doing my little thing and praying and not aware of all what I'm doing. But lots of deep spiritual energies are being released. But Torah is doing more. Torah is even more important. And the Rebbe adds, so we could say, but wait a minute. If Torah study is more important than prayer, why are we told to stop studying to pray? if Torah is more important, I shouldn't stop studying to pray. I should keep studying and studying and studying. Like, as long as I'm going to study, why am I stopping to pray if prayer is less important? But the Rebbe says the only reason our sages teach us that when you're in the middle of studying, stop to pray, is because the sages know you're going to stop eventually. Maybe you're going to stop in another 3 hours. Maybe you're stopping in another 5 hours. Maybe you're going to stop. So if anyway, you're going to take a break now, pray, and then you can go back to your studies. But for example, a person who is considered what for the tzaddik is called Toraso Unaso, his Torah is his profession, and he really doesn't take a break. And he's really like a 24/7 type person who's studying and studying and studying and studying. Such a person, according to the sages, should stop once in 30 days to pray. Then 30 days, stop, pray. But otherwise, just keep going. Because somebody truly isn't going to stop, don't stop, because Torah is more important. But if you're anyway going to stop, like you're going to stop and do this, you're going to stop and do that, you're going to stop and do that. So then if you're ready to stop for other things, stop and pray. Any questions on any of this so far?
Just if someone does go on shlichus, they spend a lot of time teaching other Jews Torah. Is that considered the same type of level, or it's different?
That's an interesting question. It depends, like what they're teaching, and are they mentally? It depends really, like, if they're mentally invested as they're teaching, for sure. Meaning, like right now, I'm the teacher here, right? Am I learning as I teach? Of course. Well, I've taught this many times before. So what? I mean, it's Torah is definitely gripping my mind. So I would think the same way any shliach, it's also gripping their mind. But something also very special to understand for anyone who's busy doing communal work, there's a promise. It says anyone who's too busy giving to others all day long, the time they spend working on themselves is multiplied by 1,000. So if someone's so busy all day long, and then they have an hour that they give to their own study, that's not an hour. That's like 60 times 1,000 hours. You don't have that in a day at all, or many days, literally. So this is a saying of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose work the Tanya we're studying. And the Rebbe quotes this very often. And the Rebbe says there's 2 points you have to remember about this concept. One, it's meant literally. It's not exaggerated. It's times 1,000. Whatever you're doing is times 1,000. The other caveat is 1,000 times 0 is 0. So if you're busy all day giving to others, and therefore you don't do anything for your own spiritual work, so it's times 0. But if you give a little to your own development, to your own growth, to your own spiritual stretch, it's so powerful because you're so busy all day helping other people. So it's wonderful to be busy giving and giving to others, and then also to remember to also make sure to work yourself and to demand from yourself as well. Any other questions? Okay. So a thinking person, if he thinks about these concepts, he can really draw upon himself a tremendous awe. Like if you think about what's happening right now that we don't feel, but we've just unpacked through the words of the Rebbe what's happening right now. And we really think into this, what's happening right now at this moment to my soul and to the garments of thought and speech of my soul at this very moment. Right now, not some faraway, place, some faraway person, some faraway time. No, right now to me, to my soul. It's like, whoa, it's awesome. Because my soul is one with the source of all the worlds. My soul is one with that which vivifies all the worlds. My soul is one with God's will, with God's wisdom, which means with God himself. My soul is so one that we can't separate. Where does, so to speak, God stop and then my soul start? It's too one for any lines of demarcation. All that's happening right now. So that is a very awe-evoking thought if I think it. If I really take the time to think about what's going on when I study. If a person contemplates deeply, how his soul and her garments of thought, garments of speech, in the brain and in the mouth, are absolutely one to such a degree of oneness we cannot separate with God's will, which means with God, with the infinity of God's energy. Mamish, literally. That's right now revealed in them. That all the upper and lower worlds are nothing. We sometimes erroneously prioritize things of the world. Whatever says all the worlds, not just this physical world, all creations, all the spiritual worlds, which are far more valuable than this physical world, are nothing compared to this that your soul's enjoying right now. Look, I have Ephes Mamish, literally nothing. To such a degree of intensity of energy that, as we said, all this energy can't even get inside the world. This energy that is one with my soul is so powerful, it can't even get into any of the higher worlds. It's encompassing it. It's from a distance. It would be too overwhelming to get inside, as we said at length. Just some ray, some glow, some glimmer from this energy is shining within those realities. A little tiny bit what they can handle and not cease to exist. Because if they experienced it, more than that little glimmer, every level of creation would cease to exist. And that's what's happening right now to my soul at this moment. So this is what the Rebbe is doing here, is he's taking this concept, which is philosophical, theological, conceptual, and he's doing what Tanya does. He's making it work, avodah, how we serve God. Meaning, in this chapter, you could say, inspired us how close we can be to God, how close we are with God when we do his commandments, and how even closer we are when we study his Torah. That's an inspirational thought. That's wow, I want to go and study Torah right now. Oh, good, I am. But the Rebbe is saying you can also take it a step further. You can not only be inspired by this concept. Literally, this concept is so deep and intense. It can evoke an awe by realizing God's presence is right now within you to that degree. And that awe is something that's transformative. That all changes how you act, because you're feeling literally right now in the presence of God who's so one with your soul. So it's a philosophical concept, and it's also a concept of work, of avodah, of how I change, how I am a different person because of this knowledge. And that's what's written, and that is what is written. So there's a verse that says that God commanded us all of these laws, all of Torah, in order to fear God. So we'd say, in order to fear God, I thought I fear God and then I do his stuff. And that's true too. There's two levels of fear. But what the verse here is saying is, through the Torah, through the awareness of the relationship I enjoy when I learn Torah, that brings me to fear of God. Because that brings me to this deep, deep, deep awe of recognizing how I'm so intimately right now within his presence. So again, a person could say, but wait, I thought fear like precedes my service because that's why I'm serving God, because I have this fear. So there are two levels of fear. There's what we call a lower level of fear and an upper level of fear. And the lower level of fear is sort of that base, he's God, I got to listen to him, fear. What we might call fear of punishment. We might not exactly think of it as punishment, fear of negative repercussions. But he's God, I get he's God, I get he exists, and I better serve. And with that fear, we can start serving. So it's a fear that brings us to serve, but it's a very like almost simplistic fear of the power of what could happen to me. But as we serve, as we come closer and closer, the fear morphs to a very different level, to an awe. The awe means this sense of his presence. When you're in the presence of greatness, you feel humbled. You feel awe. Not fearful, like I'm going to get in trouble, something bad's going to happen to me, but more like, wow, in front of this majesty, I feel so small. Not small because I'm doing something wrong, not small because someone is doing something harsh to me. I'm just shrunken in the presence of this greatness. So that's what we're talking about. That's this higher level fear that doesn't precede my work, but follows it. And the Rebbe is explaining now, why would it follow it? Why would your study of Torah lead to that feeling? Because if I get what's happening in my soul when I study Torah, and I get how God is here now within me to such a degree, it's a very awesome thought. It's a very humbling, just shrinking of self in his presence thought. So that's the fear, the awe that follows from my study of Torah. If when I'm studying, I'm aware of what's going on. Ba'al yira gedola zu amru, and on this type of awe, this great fear that follows our work and our study of Torah, they say, our sages said in Ethics of the Fathers, Emein chachma ein yira. If there's no wisdom of Torah, ein yira, there's no fear, because that fear you only get from the wisdom. But Torah nikras etzla tara ledarsa, and this is in this function, this capacity, Torah is referred to as the door of the house. It's explained in another place. Torah is referred to as the door of the house. I mean, Torah has many ways to refer to her. So this is one of them you might never have heard of. Torah, the door to the house. Well, she's the door. What's the house? So the Rebbe is saying the house is fear of God. This real high awe of God. That's like, whoa, that ultimate structure. How do you get into that structure? Through a door. Well, what's the door that gets you into that structure? Torah. Why does Torah get you into such an awe of God? Because if you think of what's going on when you study Torah, you'll feel it. So it will be the door that will let you access the house. This level of relationship with God, this fear of God, which is the house. So that means it's, in a sense, even more important. The Rebbe referenced a Mishnah, a statement from Ethics of the Fathers. So in Ethics of the Fathers, it says a sort of perplexing statement. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear. And you're like, all right, that makes a lot of sense. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. So that's telling me I have to have fear and then I can have wisdom. All right. But then it goes on to say, and if there's no wisdom, there's no fear. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear. That means I have to have wisdom and then I'll have fear. Okay. Each one on its own I can handle, but the problem is it's one sentence. It's in one Mishnah, one statement in Ethics of the Fathers. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. And by the way, we're going to flip it and say if there's no wisdom, there's no fear. So then you say, I want to serve, but I'm really confused. What do I do first? If I have fear, that should lead me to wisdom, but I can only have fear once I have wisdom. But to get that wisdom, I have to have fear. But to get the fear, I have to have wisdom. So I'm stuck. What do I do? So there's obviously various ways to understand this saying. How the Alter Rebbe is explaining it here in Tanya is we're talking about two different levels of fear. That's how he resolves this like confusion. There's an upper fear, awe of God's presence, there's a lower fear, as we said, fear of punishment, fear of getting in trouble, fear of doing the wrong. So the lower fear precedes wisdom, Torah, being one with God's will and wisdom, and the upper fear flows from it. So if we can label that again, I'm not in easy access to that whiteboard. That's wonderful, but I'm not near it. So I'm just going to say it. If there's no lower fear, there's no wisdom. You can never access service of God if you don't have a basic fear of him. If you don't have a basic fear, what are you doing this for? If you don't have a basic belief, why are you doing this? So we have this basic fear. It's interesting we say fear because, of course, Tanya is very love-based. And for the first 40 chapters of Tanya, we're in chapter 23. For the first 40 chapters, it's all about love. But in chapter 41, we explained that actually the foundation of that love is fear. So if there's no fear, there's no wisdom. Without that preliminary step of a belief in God and therefore a fear of God, you're not going to get anywhere because you're not going to do anything. So if there's no fear, there's no wisdom. Without that initial lower fear, you're not going to do anything. But if there's no wisdom, there's no fear. So I start off with the lower fear, and then I proceed to the wisdom, to Torah, to studying God's will and wisdom, to becoming one with him. And then I could go, if there's no wisdom, there's no fear, there's no upper fear. I could ascend to the higher fear, to this awe, to this awareness of his presence that humbles me. Any questions on any of this? Okay, we're almost in the chapter. But you could say, whoa, this is really intense. I don't know if my brain handles this. Such a fear, such an awe, such a sense of God's presence, that's the house and Torah is only the door to get me into that house. I don't know if I'm wired that way. The Alter Rebbe says, maybe you're not. Not everyone is. Meaning there's a certain level of spiritual sensitivity that you need to have to be able to access this deep awareness of his presence. That's what this awe is, this deep inner feeling of standing in the presence of God. Such an inner way that it's, whoa, so humbling, so overwhelmingly there. And some of us can access it, and some of us can't, because it depends on our spiritual sensitization. It depends on what our soul and mind can handle. And there's this, if you're listening to me and saying, this is not me, you might be right. The Rebbe says, generally the Rebbe assumes whatever we're saying is for all. This maybe not, but that's okay. But someone who doesn't handle this at all, doesn't have any ability to access this level of awe in God's presence. Lo minav, lo miktsasa, not a shred, not a drop. You just cannot do it. You do not have the antennas for it. You don't have the ability to absorb this. Because his soul has come very, very far down. Meaning all souls start off basically on the same level. I mean, I'm saying basically, not precisely on the same level, but also start off on the highest level of the highest world. There are 4 spiritual worlds. I mean, those worlds are very broad categories, but speaking very broadly, there are 4 spiritual dimensions, 4 spiritual worlds, as Kabbalah explains, higher than our physical world. Each of those spiritual worlds have many, many layers, which we can, again, in very broad strokes, say have 10 categories. Imagine 4 palaces, and each palace has 10 floors. And my soul, and your soul, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's soul, Moses and Aaron's soul, all started off on the highest level of the highest palace, the 10th floor of the highest of the 4 palaces, otherwise known as seminal wisdom, Chachma, of the world of Atzilus, of the world of being. The highest of the 4 worlds, the highest layer, that highest floor. Again, within the 4, there are nuances, but in general, every soul started out there, every single soul, including the people that you might think, that they don't seem spiritually sensitive at all. All of our souls started out there. But then what happens was each soul has its own specific journey, its own specific trip. Each soul travels down, 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 from floor 10 to 9 to 8 to 7 to 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. And in each floor, it takes a long time, the journey. I'm making it very fast. And then you go to the next palace and start off the top layer and go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then you might have to go to the next palace and do 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You might have to go to that final fourth palace and start going down those floors at well. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There are souls that travel through all of those levels. And the longer the trip, the more the soul's power is constricted and constricted. All the souls started, like, again, these enormous beacons of light. But on each layer, and it's not like one step journey, there's many, many steps within each floor. I'm just making it like simplistic here. On each floor, on each step of each floor, the soul gets more constricted and more constricted and more constricted. So some souls don't have to travel that far. The greatest, greatest, greatest souls stay in that first palace. Those are like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, like Moses and Aaron, those types of souls. And then high majority move on to the next palace. Within the next palace, only the really greatest of the saintly tzaddikim, the most righteous, their souls can stop somewhere in that second palace. And most of us move on to the third palace. We're still very righteous people, souls stop. And then people move on to the fourth palace. And then within the fourth palace, there are many layers, many levels. So the Rebbe said, it could be that a soul journeyed so long till the last levels of the lowest world that the powers got constricted, meaning inside of you, the good news is inside, very deep, it's all there. We all started off roughly on the same place. But at this moment, because of that long journey, and each step was more constrictions and more constrictions and more constrictions, by the time that soul comes to this world, because wherever you stop on the spiritual worlds, then the soul enters this world with that level. So if you stop somewhere in the first palace, whoa, are you dynamo, dynamo, dynamo? And if you stopped at the very, very lowest levels of the last one, you're a lot more constricted. And maybe therefore you can't have this spiritual sensitization, though very deep inside of you, it's all there, but it's very buried. Like, things, those Russian stacking dolls. So the most precious one is the smallest one, deep, deep inside. It's there, but it's deep, deep inside. On the surface of the soul, it's not so accessible. And that's possible. It's possible. For reasons God knows, where one soul stops here and one soul stops here. But every one of us has a mission. Every one of us is here for a reason. Every one of us has all of the abilities and resources we need to fulfill our mission. We all come into this world, even the soul that went through all 4 worlds, very well laden, very rich with all the resources we need, physically and spiritually, all the resources we need to fulfill our mission in this world. So therefore, if you don't have the spiritual capacity to feel this, not your mission. Because if it was, you'd have the ability. And if you don't have the ability, it's not your mission. And that's okay. You can serve God perfectly without it. But if you have more spiritual sensitization and you can feel it even a little, it's going to move you very, very, very far in your spiritual journey.
Cyril?
Mhm.
Yes.
Sure.
So we're saying that the souls can be in the higher worlds, and at the same time, the soul is in the body. Is it connection to this world?
So I took a not very simple idea and I sort of said it quickly. I mean, it might have sounded like I said it at length, but I really said it quickly compared to the concept. I didn't clarify. So to answer Rachel's question, that's a little true too, but that's not what I meant. The soul starts off highest level, highest world, travels however far God determines that soul should travel. Her destination, however far she's supposed to go, let's pretend this soul is supposed to go to the 3rd level of the 3rd world. Okay, still pretty good. She goes through the whole first palace. She goes through the whole second palace. She's now at the top of the third palace. She goes through the first layer. She goes through the second layer. She's now somewhere in the third layer. I mean, a very specific place. I'm just saying somewhere in the third layer of the third palace. Oh, this is her destination. This is where that soul is supposed to come to. From that point, the soul enters this world into the body. So that soul in the person's body, in the Jew that's possessing that soul, is very marked by her journey. She's especially marked by her final destination, meaning the destinations are God's energies. God has emotions, God has intellect, God has combinations where emotion is dominant, but intellect is there. God has combinations where intellect is dominant, but emotions are there. Whatever that final spot was, that very much molds and impacts the personality of whoever possesses that soul. Because let's say the soul went to a certain highly emotional, giving, nurturing level. Certain level, I'm thinking it doesn't make a difference to say it, so it doesn't make a difference. A very, very giving, pure emotion and pure giving. Well, that person is going to be pure emotion and pure giving because that's the soul. But how spiritually sensitive will that person be? It depends on where in the journey that soul went to. But when we're talking about the soul, we're talking about the soul inside of you, but that was impacted by the journey the soul took before entering your body. Now, again, I'm making it like as if it's sort of simple, mathematical facts or something. Obviously, it's not. Obviously, it's complex concepts, and we're just trying to simplify it to make it intelligible. But there's a lot that goes on. So Rachel said, could a soul be in your body and above? Absolutely, 100%. There's 5 levels of a soul. 3 are within, 2 are encompassing. But it's possible for some person to have a part of the body, a part of the soul in the body, a part of the soul on some higher level spiritual reality. That does happen sometimes. Lots of different things happens with souls. But we're just sort of making it like this basic general concept. From wherever it landed on that palace, it goes into your body and circumvents the rest of the journey, which is the idea. The more you circumvent, the less you're affected by the trip, the less you're made small by the trip. Any other questions? Because I did put a lot out there very quickly.
Does the soul, does the palace, is that reference to one of the worlds? Like,
Yes,
what is
I'm using the metaphor of palace for the 4 basic spiritual worlds of Atzilus,
Okay.
Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya.
Okay,
I'm
thank
just
you.
using that metaphor.
Okay, thank
Any other questions? Okay. But someone doesn't feel this at all. Not even a tiny drop of such a awe and sensitization to God's presence. Because his soul traveled very far, so his soul became very small. Traveled all the way down to the lowest levels of the lowest world, the bottom levels of the 4th palace. Ein yirazum akeves bo lemaisa. Good news, it's fine. The fact that you do not have this awe of God in no way impedes you're perfectly serving him. So what the Rebbe is saying here is so interesting, because this is Tanya. Tanya is about our spiritual journey. Tanya is about understanding our relationship with God. Tanya is about feeling a love of God and a fear of God. The whole Tanya is encapsulated in feeling a love and fear of God. And at the same time, the same Rebbe that's writing this Tanya says, don't worry. In the end of the day, what's important is you serve. Now, obviously in Tanya, the Rebbe wants to reach us, and the Rebbe is going to give many, many different options and types of levels of love and fear, because he wants you to walk away with the love and fear of God, because the love and fear of God is so important. And with the love and fear of God, you can perfectly serve. But if I'm going to tell you lots of high, beautiful spiritual levels, if you can feel them, awesome, great, how lucky you are. And if you can't, no big deal. You can still serve God perfectly. In the end of the day, Tanya, the author of Tanya, is saying, what's the bottom line? That you serve. So it's like, on one hand, we want you to know, we want you to be inspired, and we want you to feel. And all of this is you can do. So if a person, I mean, so to speak, has lots of knowledge of God, lots of sensitization to God, but isn't serving God, that's such a tragedy. They're brilliant and they know and they feel, but they don't do, but they're not serving. Because all of that is to lead to serve God. And that's what normatively happens, because the more you know, the more you're connecting to God mentally, which inspires your feeling, and you're connecting to God emotionally. And the more you have these emotions, the more you want to connect and do his will. So from the knowledge and the intellectual connection and the feeling and the emotional connection, it's supposed to flow naturally to doing all of Torah and all of her commandments. But if it doesn't, if there's a breakdown, there's that like worm that gnawed away at something of the links there, and you've got the intellect in you, you might think you have the emotion, but you're not serving God. Like, what a tragedy. Because the whole point was for you to serve God. So conversely, the Rebbe is saying, even though the Rebbe is trying to give you all this knowledge of God and trying to give you all these skills and tools to climb and become spiritually more and more sensitized and more emotionally close to God, at the end of the day, you're serving God. Beautiful. That's what this is all about. So there's this, don't worry. If you can't reach this very high level of fear, don't worry if you can't reach these high levels of love. Hopefully you're going to walk away with basic enough love and a basic enough fear that you're going to serve God. And that's the point. And rejoice that you're at that point. And don't feel in any way that I'm not really, because you're serving. Amazing. The Rebbe is saying, that's the point. You got it. And with that, we conclude the chapter. Any questions, any thoughts on any of this? That's interesting. We're talking about how it's supposed to work, that the more you study and understand God, the more you have a feeling for God, which leads you then to serve him more. And that's exactly what's supposed to be happening in Tanya. So I don't know if anyone wants to share, but that's really what's supposed to be happening, that as we are studying and our mind is understanding and connecting to God, the point of all that is to impact our heart. That we all, and I hope all of us, feel more love and feel more awe and fear. And then the point of that, what that should lead to, is serving God more. So I hope that's the flow that everyone here is experiencing. Their connection in their mind, their connection in their heart, and then the connection that they're serving God, which is the point of it all. So anyone want to share, or if anyone wants to share a miracle they've experienced within this last week or a little before, if you'd like.
I have something I'd like to share, if possible.
Sure.
So I think it's kind of miraculous that I have, like my husband said to me, like, okay, like you get all these shiurim, like, could you tell me where to find them when I retire? And I said, I don't know, I think they just find me. So I think that's my miracle, that these shiurim find me. But since you're saying the power of Torah, I just wanted to share a thought. And I can't give over the whole share, but just one thought about the shofar, which I thought was very inspiring. So if you know, it was very interesting. She was saying, and I don't know exactly the source because she quoted it, but I don't have it written. I don't have it in front of me. But in any event, because it's nice to quote a source, but in any event, the idea after all these things that we learned from the shofar is that how come we say that when the shofar is blown, the Satan is confused? Like he's the trickster, and he has all the tricks up his sleeves to trick us all the time. Like, what is he confused about? Like, and so the word was that he knows what, like you're saying, we don't necessarily feel, see, or know what is going on. But this, angel, whatever, he knows what's going on. And what's going on, he sees that within us, that we have, at that moment when the shofar is blown, that we have the power to totally connect with God to our greatest potential. Like we have no more limitations. We can really reach that level of not beyond the doubts and the confusion and all that. We could just really reach this ultimate level of our own great potential, of our holy, godly soul that we can really reveal. And then evil has absolutely zero power over us. And if we could do that, then the Satan knows his job is done. And he perceives the greatness of us that we're not perceiving. And so at the sounding of the shofar, we could all like tap into our deep, deep, deep connection to God and have no limitations. There's no evil can even touch us. And that's the geula, like that's our personal geula, which is going to be the global geula, because we're just not limited or affected by any evil. We're only connecting to our great soul, our source. So anyway, it was a nice thought, like just when you can imagine that, oh, now I know the secret. Anyway, that was just a thought.
Beautiful, and it relates to the parak, relates to the chapter. Very, very, very beautiful. Very beautiful. Very beautiful. Anyone else? Anyone have something they'd like to thank God for? Their thank you, God miracle of the week.
This is really from a few weeks ago. I was in darkness last week.
And the week before, I think you had more than, I think
it was
you had a problem with your internet another week, or that's someone else?
and I was also away. So, hi, Sarah.
Sleeping, don't ask.
What?
Yeah.
So I was in New York, and so our second Anakin Mendel had his Hanachas tefillin. It was very special. They chose to do it at the IO, and so I decided on the way out that I would watch the video, because we came in through a different way, to go out a different way. So, and it was just it worked out. It was perfect. So the first clip that I saw was the Rebbe davening for the Rebbitzin for Chof Bei Shvat for the yard site. So in later years, when I was trying to have a shidduch for Chaya, I decided that I'd ramp it up and start saying the Rebbitzins kapitel. So I always say it now, Baruch Hashem, and so that was like very, very meaningful. And then the second one was also so meaningful. It was the Rebbe singing Hoshia Es Amecha, and one of my professional heroes is Rabbi Avraham Tursky. And when I was going to social work school all those years ago, I used to make deals that that I should get signs and everything if it's not meant for me to keep going. And I tried to be very careful and not mix and whatever. I really tried to keep that like as a separate avodah. And I never, ever opened a book or a note on Shabbos or Yontif, because I really had to make all these deals. So he came to speak here a number of times. It was like a capsule kind of my life. In two short
little clips.
In two clips. But and I'm going to tell you another thing that happened there. But it was such a short amount of time, and it really was fabulous. So the other thing that happened, and I could have done the reverse and gone in. And the timing was such hashgacha pratis. Then I was sitting in there, waiting till Mendel said his mimer and stuff like that. and an old friend that I hadn't been in touch in many, many years, who was like very pivotal to me at the beginning. They lived near the daycare center where I taught on Crown Street. Ruthie and Yerachmiel Andruzier. And she must have hugged me 4 times there, you know, and it was so meaningful. So I said, I pointed to Mendel and I said, I'm so happy you're here because you had such a part in his life that he doesn't even know, but for sure in my life. And thank you so much. It was just like the timing was, and they live in Florida, and they came in to visit some family and to, you know, before Rosh Hashanah and everything. So, you know, it was, if we can remember to think about and connect things, it's really, really special.
Absolutely. If we remember, and sometimes Hashem's so obvious, God is so obvious, we don't have to remember so much. And sometimes we have to be very practical.
I was listening to a share and I didn't care for it. I'm glad yours went better, Froma. But the one thing I got out of it was a nice little thing that if the word yad, hand, if one person takes another person's hand, yad, and you do yad times 2, that's 14 and 14, it's 28, and you get power, you get koyach, strength from that. I thought it was just a nice little thing to
Very
hear.
nice, very nice. We hear what we're supposed to hear. We hear what we're meant to hear. You could come late, leave early, but you got what you were supposed to get.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
everybody should have a ksiva chsimatova, a good gebench shiur, with every bracha, aleph to tough, only through revealed good. And all we really need is Mashiach.
Amen. 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 Ksiva chsimatova.
Uh-oh. Let's see.
Cyril, your microphone is not working. We cannot hear you.
Oh my gosh, sorry. Lisa, did you have something you were going to add?
We didn't hear anything for a good few minutes from you.
Oh, okay.
No,
so
I
I'm
just
so
couldn't hear you.
sorry. So I was just saying that as connected to Mashiach, that we know, we're talking about Rosh Hashanah and having a good, sweet new year. And that when we blow the shofar, which is of course the pivotal work of Rosh Hashanah, a lot of the symbolism of the shofar connect to Mashiach. The ingat that would blow, that says the great shofar will be blown by Mashiach. The ingathering of the exiles connects to the shofar. The resurrection of the dead connects to the shofar. The day of judgment connects to the shofar. And as we are listening to the shofar, we have all these spiritual intentions. We're coronating God as king, and we're saying, God, please, your kingship should be revealed in the entire world. Bring Mashiach now, that the whole world can experience your kingship. So we should all have a sweet new year. Thank you for telling me that I was muted. And thank you so much for joining. It should be a good year, revealed good for us, for all, Mashiach.
Amen.
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 Thank you.
Amen.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.